Good morning. It's Saturday, May 9th, and we're going to continue with our Python course. So previously we've completed the first 3 chapters. Today we're going to start on functions. Now, before I get into functions, I want you to imagine the following very silly scenario. We need a place to live. We need a house. So we can imagine a person in a forest maybe building a house for himself, and then he can live in that house for that day. Tomorrow comes around and he has that same need. He still needs a house, so he rebuilds a house. Now, of course, that's silly. What about the house he built yesterday? That's still a perfectly good house, and he can reuse it. That's exactly how functions work in Python. So to give you an example here, here's a function called tax, and it calculates the tax on a bill. Okay, so that's how it's defined. And then after we've built it, after we've defined it, we can use it as many times as we want. So let me go down a few lines and call the tax function, and I'm going to call it with $100. So let's say I purchased something that costs $100 and I want to calculate those on the taxes. So what happens is Python will come up here to the definition of tax. It will go through the calculation, and then it will print it out on the screen. So I'm going to look at the definitions in a minute, but I just want you to get the idea of a function definition. You're building the function one time, and then you can reuse it as many times as you want. Later on in your code, when you want to use the same function, you just call it again, but this time our bill happens to be $200. So we're taking in a parameter or an argument of 200. We're making our function call, and when we make a function call, we go up to the definition of a function, we run through whatever the function does, and it completes. So let's go through our definition to see exactly what's happening. So the second line, or the first line here, is the definition. Here we're declaring a new function called tax, and it takes one parameter called bill. The second line is a comment. It's just simply telling us what the function does. It calculates 8% tax to our bill. And now this line here, so notice we have that star equal sign. If you recall from last week, we used another similar operator, the plus equal sign. And if you recall, this meant just take some value, okay, so we'll call it a value, and set it equal to whatever it was before, and then you're going to add a number to it. So let me just do an example here. So value equals value plus 1. Okay, well, if we use this plus equal sign operator, we're doing the exact same thing. So value equals plus 1. Okay, so this line here and this line here do the same thing. Now, let's take a look at the multiply equals. So what this means is bill equals whatever it was before multiplied by 1.08. Okay, so we're calculating 8%, or we're adding 8% to the bill. And then we're going to print it on the screen. And if you remember last week, we had this %s as a placeholder for strings. Well, 1.08 is a decimal number, and in Python we call that a float. So the placeholder for that is going to be an F. And then outside the quotes we see %bill. So we're going to take whatever we calculated up here. Okay, let's say it took an argument of $100. So we calculate the bill, it's $108, and now we're going to print out this line with tax, $108. So that is the total amount. And then we have to have this return statement, and return can be null. Return might not return any value, but if we want to return that value, we have to put that word in there. So in this first exercise in Python, that is exactly what we're doing. We're defining a tax function, and then after the tax function, we are defining a tip function. So the customary tip is 15%, and it works exactly like the previous function. And down here, we're calling it. So we're starting with an initial cost value for the meal of $100, and then we're calculating the tax on it and setting it equal to this value right here. And then we're calculating the tip, and this number in here is referred to as an argument that gets passed to the definition of the function. Okay, so we're making our function call, we're passing in an argument, and the argument then is received and it goes through the calculation. So let's click run and see what happens. And you can see here the first line is to print the tax. There it is, the total amount with the tax. And the second function here is printing it with the tip, and that is that amount right there. So let's go to next. Okay, so in here we are building our own function. So what we have to do is just simply build a function that simply prints out the string eggs. So we start on line 5. I think we have to start on line 5 here. Okay, and we're going to define our function on line 5. So we say definition, okay, and the name of the function, what does the name of the function have to be? It has to be called spam. So let's type in spam. And will spam take any values or any parameters? No, it doesn't. Okay, nothing gets passed into it. We don't have to pass a number. We're not calculating tax. So you can just have a function definition that is empty, that receives no arguments or parameters. And then we finish off with a colon. We press enter. Now, what do we want our function to do? One thing, we want it to print the following message. We want it to print out eggs. And that's it. I think we're pretty much done, and we are ready to use this function. So you can see the function call down here. We're calling our function, and then we come up to the function, and what do? We print that one line. And there it is, eggs. Oh, we forgot to remember here that we have to put some comment in there. Okay, so we need to put any comment, so we'll do the triple quotes. And inside our triple quotes, we'll say this is a comment, and we'll close it off with triple quotes again. And there we go. And then we run it again. Okay, in this function, well, let's copy and paste it into Notepad and take a good look at it. Okay, so here we're squaring a number, and we know what square means. We're just multiplying a number by itself. So in the second line, we're just simply putting in a comment. Okay, so we're going to take the number that was passed in. A number has to be passed in, any number at all, and we multiply it by itself, and then we print out that value. So we're printing, we have a placeholder here, okay, and the square is that, and so this is just going to be a number, and then we square it. So let's go ahead and take a look at what they're asking us to do. We've set up a square function, call it on line number 10. Well, to call a function, just put in its name. And what number do we want to square? We want to square the number 10. So we put 10 in there, and 10 times 10 is 100. So let's go ahead, click run, and 10 squared is 100. We can see that up there. Now, one more thing. Let's really test this out. So let's take another number that we don't know the square of. So let's say 14, or maybe you do know it. And let's click Run. So 14 squared is 196. And if you're not convinced, bring up your calculator and type in 14. And there's the square function right there. And we see, yes, indeed, it is 196. So that is called the function call. And we pass in parameters into our function. So if you can take a look up here, we're defining a power function, okay? And we're passing in two parameters, two values. The first one, okay, is going to be called the base, and the second one is going to be called the power. So all we have to do is remove those placeholders. I'm going to do it in Notepad so you can see what I'm doing clearly. Control C. So we have these placeholders. Here's our power function. So we're passing in a base, and we are putting it to some power or to some exponent. So the second parameter is going to be called exponent. So let's do an example of this. Okay, so let's do 3 to the power of 3. Okay, so that's 3 times 3 times 3. And of course, you can just use a normal calculator to calculate this. So 3 to the power of, now you have to get a different function here on your calculator. It's x to the power of y. So you click that. So 3 to the power of 3. Notice we're using a caret, equals 27. So in your calculator and in some programming language, power of is a caret. So you're either going to see it defined with the caret symbol, or you're going to see it defined with 2 stars. Okay, so depending on which type of language you're using, exponent can be done different ways. So 3 to the power of 3 in your calculator is done like this, and in Python it is done like this. So let's go ahead and take a look here, see if we're finished, and we're going to put in our base and the exponent. And now we are ready to use this function as many times as we want, and we're going to test it here. We're going to make a function call on line 5. That's the function call. We're going to start with a base 37. So let's enter 37 here. And we're going to put it to the power of 4. The exponent is going to be 4. So before we run it in Python, let's do it in a calculator to see what the correct answer should be. So I'm typing 37. This is the power function here, or exponent. So 37 to the power of 4. So 37 power 4. Notice the caret. And that's a pretty big number. I wonder if I got that correct. Power function, send in base 37 and exponent 4. So it's going to be a 1,800,000. So let's go ahead and try that out. We click Run, and there is 37 to the power of 4.